And this is sort of a encore, makes it sound way better than it really is, but a repeat of one of the sessions that I did for Summit. And the reality is that pretty much everyone uses Excel. It doesn't matter, whether you're an accountant or IT or, in operations, what ERP you're using. And just one day, I thought, let me share some of these cool things that I know about Excel. And it is the most attended session that I've put together. It's a lot of fun, and it's great to be able to take a minute to try to help somebody, do something a little better with how they use Excel. So, just a little bit about me, Shawn Dorward. I'm a practice manager at Dynamic Consulting. We're a Microsoft certified gold partner, so we support all of the ERP products as partners do. We also have full Office suite, Office practice, and all the Power stuff as well. So basically anything that Microsoft offers, we generally try to be the expert that many customers need. You can find my ramblings, which aren't as often as they used to be. You think in this COVID time I'd have more time to write, but I do have many blogs in queue that I just have to get my wonderful editor, aka my wife Jennifer, to put the finishing touches on and get them out there for you all. But in the meantime, I've spent a lot of time doing these virtual events, which is pretty cool. Gotta hand it to technology in this day and age, right? We certainly wouldn't be able to do many of the things that we do without the technology. Certainly a different impact than what we're used to it having. So before we get started, just a little bit about how I present and my style. So I the slide deck, you'll get a copy of that. And there's a slide for every one of the hacks or the tips there's a slide for each one of the tips in the slide deck. And also, at the end of the session, there'll be a link or a URL that you can visit to get a copy of this actual file. So for each tip, we have a tab across the bottom, and you can get this actual file. So not only are you going to be learning some cool things today, maybe having a little bit of fun, but you'll have a viable way to put these things to use. So we'll go ahead and get started. And the first thing I want to talk about is Alt-Enter. And really what this is, I'm going to zoom in, pinch me or poke me if you're having a hard time seeing. Don't be afraid to put your nose up to the monitor like I do 90% of the time. But each of these, just pointing out here, each of these values are in different cells, A1 through A4. And many times we either have data in a cell that has multiple rows, and it kind of looks like that, or we want to get it from individual rows into that. So when you're typing in a cell, all you have to do is hit Alt-Enter. And Alt-Enter will move down to the next line within the cell. That's a nice, easy way to create multiple rows within a cell. Also, I just wanted to point out, it's a little hard to see because you can't really zoom in, and I have this in the slideshow, in the slide deck, a way to this &char10 to combine cells using a formula and have them show on multiple rows. So that's pretty helpful. I also want to point out that there is, let me zoom out just a little bit. I have it on the slide over here. This is, instead of formatting as a word wrap, right? You could do that too, but wanted to just point that out. Next up, camera. So I want to just talk about this data set. We're going to be using this data throughout the next hour or so for most of these tips. Real simple data set. I've got just a couple rows of some very, very important pieces of data. And I'm going to leverage this data in many of these tips. So one thing I want to point out, I don't remember all these off the top of my head, right? So I kind of have little cheats for myself. And it's okay if you do that too. You don't have to memorize all these, right? So we're going to show the camera, and I think the camera is pretty cool. And if I come over to the camera tab, here's, you take note to this row of data. It's actually just values, right? So 746. But over on my main data, you see that it's pointing to that camera tab. So as the data in the camera tab changes, whoops. So I'll just change that 700 to 1,000. As the data changes there, it changes over here. Well, that's cool. You may use that all the time, that kind of link reference in Excel. But I had to keep bouncing back and forth, to see that data. So let's use the camera function. The camera function, I don't think it exists in the ribbon anywhere natively, so I have to add it to the quick links. So I'll go to quick links, more commands, all commands, and then use the C button, C key, and just jump down to camera and add it into my quick links. Now I already have it there, but I wanted to show that. So I'm going to highlight this data, and I'm going to hit the camera button. And you see it kind of sort of copies it, like you see it blinking around there that it's copying. And then we're going to come over to this tab, and we're just going to click. And it drops in what looks like a screenshot. We use screenshots all day long. It drops in like a screenshot. But what's cool about this is we'll resize this and reposition it, just like you could a snippet. But because it's the camera, not really a screenshot, as I change those values, I can see the actual data change in that camera, and I get that live view, which is really cool. I absolutely love that. That's just one use case for it. Whoops, my mouse scroll went a little crazy. I hope you like that. Let's take another look at another tip, goal seek. So goal seek is one of these kind of what if situations. And if I wanted to know here on my first line, I've got 19 sold, 500 each, and my total profit's 9,300. But if I wanted to know how many would I have to sell for my profit to be $20,000, now we could do some algebra, but let's go into, let's see, data, what if, and then goal seek. So I'm going to click goal seek, and this little window pops up. So I want to set the cell, which is my G5, my G5 cell. I want to set that to 20,000 by changing how many I sold. Remember, that's my question. How many do I have to sell to get to the profit of $20,000? And hit OK. So what this does is it goes through that. You see it's put my total profit to 20,000. It says, hey, based on what you told me, you have to sell 40.82 of these to get a profit of exactly $20,000. I can either accept those changes, and then those changes become permanent in my data set, or I could just hit cancel, and everything will go back to the original way it was. That's what, goal seek. Pivot tables. I love pivot tables, and I want to point out two things. So you can move the pivot table. So as you create, I'll go to Insert Pivot Table, and I'll create a new pivot tab. It puts it right in A3, which is fine. But if you're ever using like a chart or something that's dependent upon that pivot table, what you can do is move it. So my pivot table is way over here, and all I really had to do was come into pivot table. Let's see, pivot table. Where's my cheat? I don't have a cheat sheet on this one. There we go. Pivot table, move default, move pivot table. So we'll go to here and then move pivot table, and I can put that wherever I want then. Just put it there. And it makes it really easy to move. You may have known that. Also, if you note, I've got some totals. I've got my row, my grand total. I've got, some filterings. And all those changes can be done when you build the pivot table. But if you go into File, Options, and again, Data, Edit Default Layout, you can identify what you want your pivot table to look like from the start. Now, certainly that can change as you go, right? But if you're constantly turning on or off totals and row totals to match what your preferred presentation is, go ahead and make those your defaults. It makes it a little bit easier. What do we have next? Let's see. Filtering. So a lot of stuff with filtering. So we can filter things by, let's see, we can smallest to largest, obviously. We can sort this by color. So if we have colors in our data set, we can sort them by color. I love this, especially if you're one of those folks who goes through a data set and you highlight something that you need to, take a second look at later on. You can just simply sort by those colors. But also if you use any kind of conditional formatting, which we'll talk about in a minute, that is also something you can use to filter by. And real easy to do this filter if you've never done it. It's just under Data. You have a data set. You just turn on Filter, and it automatically applies these filter headings to your row header, your field header for you to use. Pretty easy. Lots of cool stuff. You can do the equals, less than. Really helpful when you're trying to track down whatever it is you're trying to track down. If you're looking for something that ends in 37 cents, you can say, contains 37 cents or something like that. Really, really great stuff in the filter. You can also use wildcards, which is really helpful. Let's talk about slicers, slice and dice. So filtering is cool. So we can say, let me show all of the transactions for David. But that was a couple mouse clicks, 1, 2, 3 mouse clicks, and let's switch it over to Andy. Couple mouse clicks. What we can do though is take advantage of slicers. So let me turn that filter off and clear that out. And because I'm in a data set, I could just go to Insert, Slicer. And now it's going to look at my table and say, hey, you've got all these columns. Which one do you want to create a slicer for? And we're going to say by salesperson. And we'll just drop that right there. So now we've got a list of salespeople. We could just easily click and toggle between those. That's a much quicker way to do it. We can clear it. We can even do more than one just by holding the control button on our keyboard. And then plus it makes it look like a little dashboard, right? So we can make another slicer, and we'll just add for product. Give this to your boss. She'll be very impressed. It's pretty cool. Slicers are really awesome. Very simple example here, but put those to use. Love them. Go to errors. It's kind of a weird way of calling it. Go to error, but I don't have a tab for this. But if you ever have a data set come in and you've got formulas everywhere and you're trying to find out, that dreaded £n/a error, right? And I say dreaded because I really mean it's dreaded. It's dreadful to look at those. But if you've got a large data set, it's not so bad on a small data set, right? So if I were to just put some formula in here, something with an error, it's not so hard on a small data set. I see my error. There it is, right? There's division error. But on a data set that's off to the right or off to the bottom, a larger data set, what you could do is you can use the Control G. I know I called this find errors, but it's more of a go-to error. Control G is the go-to, and then we'll go to special. A couple clicks, don't worry. We're going to go to formulas and uncheck everything except errors. So now it's going to go no matter where in your spreadsheet and identify those errors. This makes tracking them down so much easier, especially in those larger data sets. So very, very cool. I want to point out Power BI is all the buzz, right? It's awesome. But a lot of us have our files in Excel, and we kind of feel like, I have to recreate the wheel to get it into Power BI. Well, you can actually publish an Excel spreadsheet into Power BI. You don't have to do a thing. It takes exactly what you have and pushes it out there into the Power BI service so that you can use that the same presentation of your Excel data in a Power BI report. Easy to do. Another one I want to talk about, I don't have this installed, is something called compare files. For the folks in accounting, and maybe I hope this isn't just me because I would feel really dumb if it was just me, because I'm telling you, this is just how I do it. I create new files every month. In accounting, I have, October journal entry. I've got multiple tabs. I just file save as. Now it's November journal entry. We'll kind of archive those over time. But let's say you do that and somebody else does that, or you can't quite figure out what happened to your file, or you send a copy of your file to Pam and she sends it back and something is changed. Maybe somebody accidentally deleted a formula. At any rate, there's many different ways to use this, but it's something called compare files. You can install this tool. It's free. It's offered by Microsoft. It's not installed by default, but you have to go to the link is on the slide deck. You have to go and install this free add-in from Microsoft. It's called Compare Files. You point from one file, you tell it which file you want to compare and which file you want to compare to. And the Microsoft Excel goes through each of those files and it identifies cell by cell which cells are different. Is it different formatting? Is it a different value? Is it a different formula? And it literally tells you the difference between those two files. Takes a little bit of processing power, which is why I don't have it installed on my little wimpy laptop. But it is free. It is helpful. Check that out. Let's talk about conditional formatting. Conditional formatting is a nice little gem in Excel. I already showed a little bit of it for these icons, but I love it because it really gives us a chance to take advantage of visualization identification. You know, yes, we can tell that 1307.6 is larger than 100, but isn't it really great just to quickly see that visual cue pop? And how we do that is where you could just highlight the cells and go to conditional formatting under the home ribbon. And there's pre-built ones in here. So we could do, you know, greater than a certain value or between a certain value. Real great. Top and bottom. So if you want to do the top 10 items, they're highlighted. You can change your color, how you'd like it to show. There's our top 10. You can also use icon sets. I'm going to drop down here and show trend. I like the directional ones a lot. Is this sort of a neutral number in the data set? Is it trending down? Is it trending up? I love this for budget to actual analysis. It's real easy to identify things. Certainly takes a little bit of the pain of looking at numbers all day away as well. So check out conditional formatting. So much to do. I also like the pie chart, if you will, the quarters, showing percent to total. Really helpful. But also cool about that, like I showed earlier, is you can also filter by them. So we've got colors and icons in here, so I can see, give me all the ones that are halfway, and there they are. Pretty cool. So much to offer with conditional formatting. Check it out. And naturally, as your numbers change, so will the icon, the conditional formatting icon. And I love that. Check that out. We already talked about me. I love talking about me, but we could do that more later. Some if and some ifs. Let's see. Oh, before we get to that, so that's a little bit about conditional formatting. Before we get to some ifs, this is also conditional formatting. And I love this. This is like my 2020 favorite thing. Not because of those colors, those pretty simple colors, but I love this. So let's take a look at this cell here. So if I make this cell 200, that might not be easy to see. Let's make this 100. You see that the color changes as I make these changes. That's conditional formatting. So if the value is this, make the color this way, and use a gradient change whether it trends up or down. So what is this doing? Well, this really is, you know, when I first saw this, my buddy Steve there, our leader here in the one of our leaders in the chapter, sends this to me, and I saw this and I was like, what is this, you know, this rainbow looking thing here? What is this really doing? But if you zoom out, this is not smoke and mirrors. This is for real. If you zoom out, nice and slow, plays a little trick with my eyes when I do that. That's a pretty wicked cool conditional formatting. Now, I'm all about cool Excel stuff, but this, not because it's my picture, well, a little bit because it's my picture, but because that's really Excel doing that work. Look, if you zoom in here real quick, I'm just going to delete this like anything else. Delete those conditional formats, and now I look like a middle schooler. Anyway, check that out. I love that. I don't know how Steve did this. He's got way too much free time, or maybe there was a tool involved. I don't know, but that is absolutely awesome. Some if and some if s. A little bit of fun there. Thanks for that, Steve. I really, really appreciate that. So we know this data set here, and I'm just going to say some if, or excuse me, some. So sum is, if you don't use it, and I'm pointing it out because not everyone knows these, that's just the very common sum function. Now, that gives us a total. That's also the auto sum, you know, so when you do auto sum, it just drops in the formula sum. But there are two other additional expansions on sum if, the function, or the function, and sum if s. And we're going to talk about this. So I summed these up. There's no separation of data required. But look at this. If I have this little data set and I want to say sum everything from this data down here and tell me anything that's associated with David. So that's what the sum if is for. So I'm just going to save us some time here and copy this formula in here. And you'll take note, if you could see that my first argument is saying what range am I going to base this on? So A11 to A20, that's where I'm looking up the data. This is an array formula. And then the criteria that I want to apply to it is A2. So I want to look at this column, and if it equals David, then I want to add the values from this column. Real easy. That's an array formula. We're going to drop that in there. So 9823, we see there's 3 rows for David, and just to check our math, 9823. Easy enough. So let's drag that down. But then let's take it and make it a little bit more complicated. So we know now this is the total for David and the total for Shawn. And we'll just make one of these Shawn so that totals. There we go. So there's our total, right? But we want to get it by food, by subcategory. So let's use this big formula here, sum if s. And it's not, don't be intimidated by this. It's real simple. We've got arguments in here. So we want it, same thing. We want to sum this data, and we're going to look, sum this data. We're going to look here based on the name, and then we're also going to look here based on the column that I'm in. So 2 variables in my sum, and now it's going to say, hey, only give me the total if it's David and if the category is food. 2698, food, and if we change this to food, it'll grab that and add it up there. So real powerful sum functions, sum if and sum if s. Let's just change one of these hotel, and it's dynamic as you see. Pretty cool. Those formula examples are in the file when you get it. As I mentioned earlier, I do write blogs, lifehacks365.com. Not going to get into how to do this. I do have a blog out there on how to do it, but I love this. I think it should be a function in Excel. And what this does is every time I move my mouse, it automatically highlights the row that I'm on. This just makes it easier for me to focus on the linear aspect of my data, the left to right. I know there's, coloring in my table, but it's still helpful to see this. That's a VB code, and it's available. You can find out how to do that on my website. You can also hold down, is it shift space? Yeah, shift space will kind of highlight the row, but when you move, it doesn't, you have to hit shift space again. It's not quite the same. Just a little tip there. I want to point out in the sum ifs, you notice sum if and sum if s is like a purple or kind of color. If you right click and you go to tab color on any tab, you can change the color of the tab. Have as much fun with that as you like. I like doing that because it points out the obvious tabs for me that I need to focus on, especially in this long list of tabs like we have here. I want to make sure I point that out. Let's move on. Changing case. So if you ever have data that you import or you just have some messy data, there's a couple functions you should know about. Lower, we're just going to point lower and point to that data, drag that down, and it does exactly what you expect. And then there's a function for upper, same thing. This can be really helpful in making data consistent throughout your file. And then lastly, proper. So not that you would use this all the time, but I find this helpful as well. Proper is just going to give us uppercase sort of book proper. Right? Pretty cool. What do we have next? Sorting data. This never gets old to me. I love this. I actually do use this pretty often. Maybe not in this fancy schmancy way, but I do. What happens is in this data here, if I want to sort this, and I want to sort this, let's just say by name. So I can go to data, sort, and I want to sort by name and by color. So I'm sorting name, descending, color, ascending. And we don't have to have 2 sort options, but for our example here we do. So I'm going to do that. And it's sorted that. So name, descending, Taylor first, Shawn, then Jennifer. If I change this to Shawn, I have to resort this data. That drives me nuts, being honest. What's the point of it? So I have to remember to do it every time. And likewise, if so we did ascending color, so BGR, if this was red, we have to resort it every time. Sure, it's not too hard to do, and it remembers our last sort, but you have to remember to do it. Well, last year or the year before, the new sort array was made available in Excel 2016, or excuse me, I guess it's called 2016, or Excel 365, I don't know. But let me go ahead and put this formula in here. It's a sort array, and all it is saying, hey, we're going to sort what data? This is the data we're going to sort. And then the next two arguments are kind of interesting. They're both in the squiggly brackets. If there's an official name for those, I'd like to know. I like, squiggly brackets kind of just make sense. Steve, do you know what they're really called?
Yes, I do. Here it is. It's called curly braces.
Curly braces. Well, squiggly brackets too. We'll go with squiggly brackets for today. But it's a rare occurrence to see in a formula those squiggly brackets. That's a little bit unique of an argument. So these, we typically have parentheses, but then here we have the curly braces, right? And this is saying, how do we want to sort? And this is identifying the columns. So my data set has 3 columns. I'm going to sort column 2, column 1, and then column 3. And then the next argument is saying, okay, you told me which columns, what order of the columns you want me to sort. How do you want me to sort that column? So column 2, we're going to sort descending, column 1, ascending, and column 3, descending. Pretty complicated. Hit enter. And there is my data, automatically sorted. I put some of the other stuff we talked about, conditional formatting. So we have Jennifer yellow, let's just change that to red. And we change it to red, everything dynamically sorts. That's the power of the sort function as opposed to using data sort. Check that out. I think it's pretty cool. Here's the example. You get this in the file. Love it, love it, love it. Dates. One of my favorite parts of Excel is dates. We're going to talk about a few different examples here. Maybe we'll have a little bit of fun as well. So the first thing first is the day function. We're going to go day, and we're going to point to B3. So what happens when we do day is it's going to identify the day of the month. We'll drag that down. By the way, if you don't know how to do that, that's just a double click on the grabber there. Double click, bring it all the way down. Gives us the day of the month, 20th, the first of the month, second, etc. And then we have the month function. Same thing, pretty self-explanatory. Gives us the month. And lastly, the year. Pretty good. Nice, easy way to extract the data that we're looking for. Next, though, we have is eDate. And what eDate does is it's going to give us the option, and we're going to point to this date. We're just going to add a -1 to this. And what this does is it says, okay, we're going to advance or back up the date of this value identified in our argument by a number of months. Obviously, 1 is going to move it ahead, and a negative number is going to move it back. So I could say -12 and take me all the way back there. What happens on leap year? I heard you ask. It's Excel. It's smart enough to know that there's no 29th of 2019. Pretty cool. That's eDate, and that moves dates by month. Now we have something that we can talk about. If you're, it's a text function. There's so many uses for this, but what the text function does in dates is a little cool. So I'm just going to say text B3 with 1D. And that gives me the day. D for day, no different than over here, day. It gives us the day. Look at the day here is to the right because it's a number. Here to the left because it's a text. No worries, we can fix that too. So drag that down, we get the day of the week. Pretty cool. But let's take this and go, instead of 1D, let's add another D. Same thing, except now we have consistent data. So the single days of the month now become consistent. My OCD kicks in. I prefer this. It's entirely up to you. Check that out. Now let's add another one. Now we get the day text name of the week. So the Sunday, the 3-digit version, drag it down. This can be really helpful. If you do any kind of reporting tricks in Excel, this can be really helpful. And lastly, let's add a fourth one, and we get the full name of the week. So that's pretty snazzy. Took a little bit different of a step, 20 versus Sunday, pretty cool. This is also true for month, using the M. 2 M's, same thing. 3 M's, gets the name of the month, and 4 gets the full name of the month. Year, kind of the same. Doesn't really recognize it. The same way that's 20, meaning 2020, when we have the Y, not the day of the week or day of the month. That's 2020, 2021. 2, doesn't really make a change. 3, just gets it fully qualified, right? Pretty cool. All right, let's move on to days. Let's do the days. This returns the number of days between 2 dates. Excel date math. So we'll just say this day and this day. How many days are in between it? 366. Pretty helpful. You can do this minus this. Get the same, but if one, depending on formatting, you might run into problems with a formula like that. So days really gets you to where you need to be. And then how about network days? Boy, oh boy, I miss the networking days. But network days here is something different. This is the number of days in a data set that are considered work days. The number of work days in a data set. Now, in the US, a work day is considered Monday through Friday. That's really up to the settings on your computer, the localization for your computer. In my case, Windows 10, those settings apply here. So if you're somebody who lives in a different area and work days are different, you need to change your local setting. But if all we have to do is say, here's my start date, here's my end date, and tell me how many work days are in that set of data. And in this case, there are 10. So remember, where were we at here? Here, let's do this. So this is a Sunday, so that's not a work day, right? Monday. But if we change that to 20, again, we replicate the 20. Whoops. Oh no, Excel, don't do me. Don't do me like that, Excel. Come on. Oh no. You've been so good to me lately. I may have to reopen the file. Bear with me just a quick second. That's okay.
Shawn, are you using 32-bit or 64-bit Excel?
This would be 32.
Okay.
Because I have GP.
There is that.
Okay, so I just opened another copy. Always come prepared. Never was a Boy Scout, but hey. Let's move over to where we at dates. And we'll just jump over to network days again. So we're going to do network days because I want to show you the rest of this. Here's my first day. Here's my last day. I've got 10 working days in there. You may have noticed that there's a tricky little argument, an optional argument at the back end of this function, and it's called holidays. So if you have a data set where you're starting and with a date and ending with a date, but you want to exclude holidays, you just have to tell Excel what your holidays are, and it will exclude them from the list as well. So in we've identified Christmas Day as a holiday, but some places Christmas Eve is also a holiday, and it's going to automatically count those. I love this for ratios, you name many, many good reasons to use this all through Excel. Our file kind of picked back up over here, so that's great. Let's move on to EO month. EO month. This is going to tell us the last day of the month. As an accountant, I've used this more than I can possibly imagine. I'm going to grab this day and I'm going to say, tell me the end of the month, the current month. Notice that (0) argument. That's because I don't want to advance it at all. I just want the last day of the month for the current month of this date. If I want the last day of the month for last month, based on this date, it's going to do that just by putting a negative number. Positive number gives me the last day of the next month. What? Look at this in the -12 bracket. If you're doing year-to-year, year-over-year analysis, real easy to do. No fancy math involved. You could just use EO month. And then weekday. Let's do weekday. This tells us the number of the day. So this is Sunday, remember? So that's day 1. of the week. If I make this 21, which would be a Monday, it's going to make it day 2. So those folks who do a lot of CRM stuff, this is pretty popular to get the day of the week for that date, 1 through 7. Naturally, if you get an 8, you did something wrong. Week number is the week number for the year. So if I look at this particular day, the week number there is going to be 52 because that's the last week of the year for that year. Now that's because the next week would be actually considered the first week of the new year. So just a few simple things about dates.
Hey, Shawn.
Next on the list, yes.
I've got a couple of questions. Gene Guest has a Gene has a question, and Marcy asked one. You said something about 32-bit Excel because you're using GP. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, you don't have to use 32-bit Excel for folks who use GP. There are some nooks and crannies of the product that still require a 32-bit driver. And so for me, someone in my position where I'm working with many customers who have many different infrastructures, it just makes it easier for me when I go to try to troubleshoot those things. So that's a little bit about that. You certainly can open it and save it as a 64. It's not required. I do it just to kind of avoid some of the nuances of some of the older versions of GP, older infrastructure, that kind of thing.
Okay. And Gene, if you want to turn on your microphone, go ahead and ask your question. No? Maybe stepped away. Well, go ahead, Shawn. We'll get back to Gene.
All right. No worries. We're going to talk about separating data a little bit here. I've used some of this kind of Excel formula magic, like equals mid, A4 left, A4 5, trying to get the, certain parts of data. Particularly when talking about a chart of account structure, like a string for your chart of accounts, if you just want one segment. I've found myself doing that a lot, and even with just separating data that comes in. But what you can use is just highlight the data. You don't really need to use fancy formulas, and choose under the Data tab, Text to Columns. Text to Columns opens up the Text to Column wizard, and in my case, these are delimited by hyphens or dashes. So I'm going to just say delimited using the dash. And notice we're starting to get the preview of this. And then you tell it where you want to put the data. So I'm going to start in B4. I have a space in there, so it's going to give me an error saying, hey, there's something already there. That's okay. And then it automatically separates that data for me. That's sort of one. It's not a formula, so it's not like if we change this, it won't change over here. It's a once and done, so you just have to re-invoke that. And it works for many other different types of data as well. So we're just going to go to data, text to columns here. And in this case, we're going to use the comma. And we're going to start it in B10. And then we get our names separated just like that. Now that certainly can be helpful. And those are very basic examples, but I wanted to point that separating data. Speaking of, I may have done this already, but way down here, if you follow my mouse, way down here in the bottom left-hand corner, there's these left and right arrows. You can slide your tabs, which is great. But if you right-click on here, you actually get a list of all your tabs. So if you've got a spreadsheet with lots of tabs, this is a real easy way to jump all around from one tab to the other. Whoops, don't look at that. That's a preview of what we're going to talk about soon. Pay no attention. So that's all the way down here, right-click, and you get a list of your tabs. I love this. I wish there was a way to dock this. I know we have a list here, but I kind of wish there was a way that you can dock a list of your tabs. If anybody knows, please let me know. That's pretty cool. That's how you see a list of your tabs. Showing formulas, just want to point out in the Formulas tab, there is a Show All Formulas. And you can literally, that's probably a bad example, but you can pop open all of the formulas in your spreadsheet for you to see. I like using that, especially when I'm auditing some things that have a little bit of heavy math involved. Formulas and show formulas. Check that out. Breaking pivot tables up in the tabs. My friend Belinda showed me this, and honestly, I can't get enough of it. So I want to pass it on to you as well. This is a pivot table. Remember that data we talked about earlier with the salespeople and the products? Well, here it is by product, and we have everyone here. So we could filter this and just show David's and just show Kimberly. See, real easy. And then we have that built in the filter of the pivot table. So if we pop open our field list, you see in our filter section is the salesperson. This little trick only works if there's a filter. But what happens here, let me go back to all, is because this data is for 3 different salespeople, organized through the filter, what we can do is come up to options and go to show report filter pages. That's a mouthful, but that's really what we're looking to do. If I click on that, it's going to say show the pages by which filter. In my case, I only have one filter, salesperson. Before I hit OK, watch down here. When I hit OK, watch down here. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Boom. I have new tabs now, one for David, one for Kimberly, and one for Andy. So that took that pivot table and it separated the data and created new tabs for each individual salesperson. That's pretty cool, saving me a ton of time. And guess what? They're real pivot tables. So the data that this is dependent upon, as it changes, so will each one of these tabs. Could save you a lot of work. Really, really cool. Let's slide to the right. Crisscross. And take a look at pasting multiplier. This is a little trick. I use this a lot when converting percentages. So what you do is you, what's the trick here? I can never remember the order. You copy the multiplier first. That's the part I don't remember. So we have this data, and we want to multiply it all by 10. We could do this in a formula, but it's a once and done thing, so we don't really want to do that. So we're going to copy this 10, then we're going to highlight this data, right-click, and go to Paste Special, and then right here, Operation, we can add 10 to all of those values, subtract 10 from all those values, multiply or divide by 10. Let's do divide by 10. I know I said multiply, but you get the idea. So because I copied the 10 and I'm choosing divide, everything that is highlighted is going to get divided by 10. Boom, just like that. That's Paste Special using multipliers. Or I guess I should call it operations because it's really add, subtract, multiply, and divide. I tend to use multiply in the real world more often than I would use anything else. Find and find all. I kind of want to just point this out. Let's go to a set of data here. Where's the change case? Yeah, here we go. So if I do Control F or find, I want to find the word July. And there's July. But what if I want to find every time? And I can go find next, right? Let me copy these. Let me copy this over so I get the actual thing I'm looking for. So if I want to find the next instance of July, I just say next there, and it moves me to the next one, right? But what if I want to see all of them at once? I just choose find all, and I get a list of all of the cells, and I can use these as hyperlinks, and it'll jump right to that spot. Now, mine are just next door to one another, but if these are all spread out through your spreadsheet, this makes it much easier to find and much easier to track down. Think about how you might use that when you're researching maybe bank reconciliations, all those kind of things. That's the find all. It's right to the left of find next, and it can do a pretty good job of helping you track things down. That's find all. Flash fill. This is an oldie but a goodie. Again, here we have this data set, and I could use a complicated search function to find the dot in that email address to get the first name, last name, or the @ sign. That could be a pretty complicated function or formula, but I certainly could do that. And I've done that. But with flash fill, what Excel will start doing is just recognizing our effort by predicting, if you will, based on what we're typing. So I type Nicolette, and as I start typing Dante, you'll see kind of the ghosted version of everyone's first name. Excel said it looked like you type just that first part up to the dot in that first cell, and looks like you're doing it again. If I just hit enter, it does that. Now, that's a static change. There's no formula involved, but that's pretty cool. Love that. And it doesn't just stop at the first part. So if I type in Brossart and Kynes, it also recognizes, hey, you've typed in after the dot and before the @ sign. Can I repeat that for you? Yes, you can, Excel. Thank you. And then I can even do, let's do the gmail.com. Nope, I don't know what I did wrong there. At any rate, you get the idea. That's a really great and easy way to separate out our data real easy. That's flash fill. We're getting to the top of the hour, which means we're almost through with Excel Life Hacks. I hope you're learning a few things and having a little bit of a good time. I want to talk about 2 more things. As I take a sip of my coffee, I want to talk about 2 more things. And the first one is something really, really cool, and it's called XLOOKUP. If you use Excel, you are probably accustomed to using the VLOOKUP. If you've never heard of the VLOOKUP, let us know in the chat. If you use the VLOOKUP and it drives you bonkers like it does me, take a look at what we're going to talk about with XLOOKUP. Some of the restrictions of VLOOKUPs, right? You can only look to the right of whatever you look up. You can't look to the left. So you might use like an index and match replacement to kind of circumvent some of those restrictions. Your data has to be sorted just right, which is also complicating the value of VLOOKUP. Now there's also HLOOKUP, which nobody uses, gets no love, but that also is available. VLOOKUP is out there. Now, because of those restrictions, if I were wanting to look up and get the name for employee 9514, the name is to the left of 9514. That won't work with VLOOKUP, okay? But with XLOOKUP, it will. And so I'm just going to grab my formula. And what I'm doing in this formula is I want somebody to type in the employee ID here, look in my data set, which also has blanks in it. VLOOKUP does not play well with blank rows. The data I'm looking up is to the right of the data I want returned, right? So I'm going to paste this in here, and this is my argument. Let me pop this open. So I'm going to look up the value from F1. Where is it at? Did I copy the wrong formula? Yes, you did, Shawn. Yes, you did. That's okay. Here we go. Let's take a look at this formula instead. So here, let me put that in, that, and go into function. There we go. So our lookup value here is B2. We want to look up B2. We're going to look it up in the array C6 through C17. That's right here. And we're going to return the value associated with that lookup from the B column. If it's not found, return the value saying not found. So we're looking up to the left, which is very cool. I can't believe I said that's very cool when we're looking up to the left, but the reality is, if you've ever used VLOOKUP, you would probably agree. So let's do that. So we've looked up 9514. Let's put in 7643, and we get the returning Katina. And also here I have a similar lookup that is returning the department based on that as well. Notice that that's dynamic 9514, and it also changes. If I put in something that's not on the list, we get a not found, and that's XLOOKUP. So imagine this giant data set, and you want to find out, hey, employee 6684, what department is that person in? There it is, sales. Let's get a little more complicated and do a nested XLOOKUP. It doesn't look complicated. It may feel a little overwhelming to look at this, but let me zoom in. And I've got a data set here. I've got total sales by quarter. Total sales, Q2, Q3. Got my gross profit. Somehow it's greater than my sales. And my depreciation, you can tell I just threw numbers in there. But what I want to do here is I want to be able to say, hey, make this a little user-friendly. Can somebody pick a quarter and have it return the gross profit, or pick the total sales? These are just drop-down list data validations. Let me put in this XLOOKUP. And it's essentially saying my first one is going to look up the value for F1, which is the row header. And then we're going to find that in F5 through 7. So it's just looking here. And then we're going to nest in another XLOOKUP because we're going to look up the quarter value and return the quarter from that data set. And there we go. So all we have to do then is we can change gross profit. Let's change it to depreciation. And it's going to return automatically the 225 for Q3. If I switch this to Q4 for depreciation, it's going to return 281.25. That's a nested XLOOKUP. Pretty fancy stuff. Incredibly powerful. Last and most certainly not least is sorting by columns. If you've ever done this, and if I want this column to be over here, what we do is we kind of, at least how I do it, I would insert, and then I would kind of cut this and paste it over here, and then I got this empty row I have to delete, right? Well, what you can do, let's put it back to where it was, is give yourself a cheater row, and I just inserted this row, and tell in that cheater row what order you want things in. So if I want this column first, this one second, this one third, this one fifth, and this one fourth, and then all we have to do, let me get to my, is go into our sort, data sort, and in here, instead of the default, which is left to right, we're going to sort top to bottom. Or actually, the default is top to bottom. We're going to switch it to left to right. Mine was already there. And what this is doing now is we say, okay, it's row 1 is the value we're going to sort by. So let's do that. Smallest to largest. Watch what happens. Now, because we use our little cheater row, we've sorted our column. We can get rid of this. Now, this is a simple example. It might have been just as easy for me to cut and insert like I showed, but imagine you've got a wide set of data. Sorting columns is not hard, not impossible. That's a little cheater row. We can just get rid of that when we're done. Put them in the order that you like. And that's it. That's all of our tips for today. I hope you learned one or two things. Maybe this bit.ly, HTTP, etc., bit.ly. You can see it. The thing to remember here is this URL is case sensitive. So the Excel life hacks, those three uppercase letters are important. Visit that URL, put in your information, and Power Automate will email you a copy of this Excel file that you can have to match along with the slide deck so that hopefully you can see these into use into your organization. I hope you enjoyed that. Steve, Pam, thank you so much for having me along, and I hope everyone had a good time.
Have you got a moment for questions?
I most certainly do, yes.
All right. I'm getting an odd echo here, but we'll work through it. Sarah would like to know, would that nested XLOOKUP be similar to doing an index match?
Absolutely. An index match combination, those are two separate functions for those who aren't familiar with them. It is doing a very similar thing to be able to look left and right, up and down. That is exactly correct.
All right. Then we have a question from Sethan. Sethan Casper asks, what is the difference between XLOOKUP and index match? So a little bit expanding on that.
So index and match, and you can do a Google search to see how that works. There are limitations still involved. So we have not too many, but it's a little bit more complicated in how you organize that statement. So don't get me wrong, you could still achieve these same things. I do think there's a benefit in simplicity, also speed. In this data set, it's a small data set, and we're using an array function, so it's pretty powerful. Notice when we do the X lookup how we're not anchored to the entire data set. There's assumptions made because it's an array that the relationship to one column exists to another column just because they're part of the formula. So not all that different. The short answer is not all that different. I think it's just a little easier to put the pieces together with X lookup.
Okay. And Sarah has a question too. Are the presentation slides included in that bit.ly link?
They are not included in the bit.ly link. Those will be, the chapter will publish those on the GPUG chapter page, I believe, right,
Right.
Steve?
Exactly.
Yes.
We'll do that.
But you will certainly get those as well.
Okay. And I want to mention that tab you showed with your picture in red, green, and blue pixels. I posted a link to the web page that produces that spreadsheet from any picture. You upload the picture, it produces the spreadsheet, and I make mention in the chat about what the link is, and also the kind of not a warning so much, but something that I ran into. The spreadsheet works best when you open it for the first time if you have 32-bit Excel. If you got 64-bit Excel, there's a whole series of errors. So I opened it in 32-bit first, and then I saved it right away. Then I was able to send it to Shawn and not have any problems with it. But it's also part of a presentation by a guy from England who did a comedy routine based on that spreadsheet, believe it or not.
Awesome. That's awesome.
So I don't see any other questions in the chat. Shawn, you are certainly welcome to hang around, but I know that you probably have clients that are banging on your door at this very moment.
That's all right. Hey, well, thanks for having me. I'll get this slide deck to you, Steve, so you can distribute it to the group here, and I hope you have a great rest of the meeting.
All right. Thank you very, very, very much.
You're quite welcome. My pleasure.
Okay. There were a number of reasons why I wanted to have a more flexible way to do Excel refreshable workbooks. I mean, everybody uses smart lists, and when you work with a smart list and you've got the data selected that you're interested in, and I'm just going to take an easy one here, the financial and the account list. So here, and I'm going to stop. We've got about 5,000 accounts. It doesn't really matter. But this list, you can export to Excel anytime. Anything that you've got on screen can be exported to Excel. If I do that, however, I stopped the readout of the data at 350 rows, and that is all I've got in Excel. So you'd have to, in Smart List, if you've got a lot of data, you'd have to change the number of records that are selected by the Smart List, and then you'd have to sit and wait, because 5,000 rows would take a while for it to percolate through. So that was one reason I wanted something more flexible in Excel. I'm going to throw this away. If you go to the Excel reports, I wanted to switch to a different company here. And fortunately, I have one of our Excel licenses. This will take a moment to come up. But when you, if you're in any of the GP areas, finance or sales or purchasing, each one of those areas has a list of Excel reports that you can look at that use the same views, the same SQL views that smart lists do. There's a correspondence there between the types of smart lists that are available to you, and smart list, of course, gives you a lot of flexibility with with selecting conditions, to filter the list of rows that you get returned. Whereas the Excel reports will, I'm going to go into sales and look at my list of Excel reports for the sales area, and I'm in the Fabricam company. And when we get the list of reports, we'll see, let's say customers. I want to get the right one because I don't want the connections. And actually, I'm going to filter this out. I don't know if you do this or not, but I really don't like using connections. That's just a preference of my own. But I only want to see the reports. And okay, okay, the customer's default. If I double click on that, and it'll go into Excel, and it will produce the list of customers from a SQL query, and this is refreshable. I know that because I can go into the Data tab and look at the queries and connections, and I can see directly what data is being extracted from SQL. And I'm showing you click by click where I go to get to it. I right-clicked on the connection and then shows properties. I get this 3-tab dialog box. The middle one is the important one. A lot of stuff in here, but the important part of it is this command text. And it shows the SQL statement that selects the columns that we want to see, and here they're arranged conveniently in a stack, and it tells me what view is used to produce this list, and it also puts it in order by the customer number. So that's pretty clear cut. But these Excel workbooks are a little bit limited in that it brings in all the data from GP. Now imagine those of you that are working in larger companies and you look at your account transactions Excel report in the financial area, and if I go to the Excel reports there is a Excel report for account transactions. Okay, that's the connections and account transactions default right here. Now I happen to know, because I looked, that when I open that sheet, it gives me about 22,000 general ledger transactions. There are some companies, the last one I worked for was WOW Logistics, and I think we've got a couple of WOW people here today. If you go into the financial area and open up an Excel report on the account transactions at the WOW company, that's over 1 million transactions. Excel crashes. It'll take a long time before it crashes because it's trying to display 1 million transactions, but it gets to that limit and then crash. That's a problem. You cannot, from the Excel reports view, filter that out in any way right here. There's no way to filter it. What you see here at the top where you're adding a filter, all that is it filters out which reports are displayed. Like I did earlier, I changed the option to contain this so that I would see only the Excel reports themselves without the connections. That filter does nothing for the data that is returned in the Excel workbook. Okay, I'm going to go back to this spreadsheet where I see the fields that are returned from the customer's view. We can, if you have a little bit of moxie with SQL, and it doesn't take much to develop that. You just have to know what the fields are. If you don't know what the fields are in a particular view, you can cheat. I'm going to select all of this stuff in that command text window, and I'm going to type select star, meaning every column from customers. Okay. Now I click OK, and it warns me that this connection file will no longer be valid, because that's a set of parameters that provide you the list that we're looking at right now. It just tells you that, okay, this is not going to be in effect anymore. Do you want to proceed with changes? Yes, I do. Now, it just did it, but, I don't see anything right away. What happened? What happened was that we get all the columns now that are associated with the customers, every single one. And you see that we're going out to, oh my gosh, how many columns have we got here? Go to the end, we're all the way out to FZ. The advantage of doing this is you not only see the first several columns that were already in that view, but you might want to add something. You might want to add something related to the account numbers for that customer, or see what their average days to pay statistics are. So all of this is coming from live GP data, and you can now make use of it. Okay, I see all these columns. I'm going to jot down a few of these, like the cost of goods account number, who the contact person is, and there's probably a phone number in here too. I'll jot the names of those columns down, and let's say I just want the contact person right there. It's spelled contact space person. Fine. I go back into the queries and connections, and I right-click on the connection and click properties. By the way, this is being recorded, so if I'm going too fast, don't sweat it, because we're recording the presentation. And then in the definition, I see select star from customers. Then here you have the option of putting in the actual fields that you want to see. So customer number and customer name. There's no requirement that those field names be on separate lines, but I'm just going to put these three. Contact person. I'm putting them in square brackets as opposed to curly braces. They're in square brackets because there are spaces in the names. You may already know that, but some people may not. So I'm selecting those three columns from, let's get the right keys here, from customers. Okay. So now I'm seeing nothing. Oh, that's because I'm way out at column A, D, whatever. I go back to column A and I see those three columns that I picked. So you can alter the default query that comes from GP, but there are some limits, and one of the limits is that, especially as I mentioned with the account transactions, if you pull that from the report here, it brings everything, and if you got more than 1 million, well, you crash. It would be nice to be able to restrict the range of data that is extracted from GP. That's why I went to I created my own template for making refreshable workbooks. So I'm not going to save that. I'm going to open Excel, and I'm going to open the template that I created, and you'll be very surprised at how simple the template looks. I call it placeholder GLC. That's my company. That's the one I want to open. That's it. It is an Excel table that has one column and one row, and it's the field name is just field 1. What does that look like? In the queries and connections, because that's like the key for making this work, the queries and connections properties for this particular refreshable workbook, it shows me that the table that's displayed is a select statement, a SQL select statement, but it's just a space. I've got a space with single quotes around it. SQL likes single quotes, not double quotes, whereas Excel likes double quotes, right? Since we're using a SQL query, that's the command type we have here, then it expects SQL syntax. SQL syntax requires single quotes around character strings. And then I'm calling the field field 1. All right. The other important thing about this is the connection string up here. Now I have already prepared these are the 4 critical items that make this template work. I'm going to copy them and put them here in this box, replace what's there. This is all that you really need for a refreshable Excel report template to work. I need to tell it what database driver to use. And just about every Windows PC on Earth has the plain Jane SQL Server driver. That's what this is here. Now note the syntax of this. We have the word driver followed by an equal sign, and then what is the driver called? Okay, in this case it's SQL Server. Then there's a semicolon. Again, that's part of the syntax. I have them on separate lines, but you can certainly string them together if you want. I just like this because it's easier to read. The next parameter is the server. That is your SQL Server itself, where you've got your GP data stored. Ours is called GLC SQL2. Again, followed by a semicolon. There's no spaces in here around the equal signs. That's part of the syntax as well. Then I've got a real important one, trusted connection. Trusted connection with an underscore in between the 2 words is equal to yes. That makes this work the simplest. And what do I mean by trusted connection? That means that you, as a user, have the rights to extract data from the SQL Server outside of GP. I don't need to be in GP to get this data. The sheets that we were looking at come from GP, and there are GP rights kind of built into them. But for this to work, you need to check with your database administrator to see whether you have got a trusted connection. Do you have a direct connection to the SQL Server? If you have that, then this will all work. Okay, so I put the word yes after the equal sign because I'm an authorized user of SQL Server. You don't have to be an administrator. I've got these refreshable Excel reports that I've built by hand, distributed all around the company. And then finally, what's the database? Okay, the data for this is coming from the TWO database, the TWO GP database. Then I change the query. I'm going to select star from account transactions. That's the one I told you don't use willy-nilly, but I'm going to use it here because it's a limited number of rows. It's 22,000 rows, and it doesn't take very long to retrieve. Here it's telling me that the query is running in the background, but it does only take a few seconds. And there it is. Okay, a couple notes. I would change the name of the query here, so I'm going to put account transactions and say OK. So that changes it there. It's a little easier to spot that way. And then I'm going to save the workbook, because otherwise you'll save it over your template. I don't want the template to be saved with this stuff in it. I just want it with that little tiny 1 row, 1 column table. So I'm going to do a file save as and put it in a convenient place. So account transactions for TWO is what I'll call it. Okay, Now, how do we make this really useful? I'm going to insert a couple of rows here at the top of the table. And I'm going to put a parameter. I want this table of 22,000 rows, and I'll show you. I'm going to go down to the bottom, 22,200 blah blah, a whole bunch. It contains transactions. This is the sample company for a 6-year period from 2013 to 2018. Now I can do this and select just 2014, and it will filter out all those transactions just like that. Trouble is, the data that is in this table still is all 22,000 transactions. If you've got 1 million financial transactions and you try to bring that into Excel all in a wad, well, you're going to have trouble. Excel will crash. So what I'm going to do is add the capability to filter the data before it fills up the table in Excel. And all I'm doing is typing in a label here called transaction year, and then this is what my year is going to be. I'll put 2017 just as a sample. And I format them. Generally, I format them a little bit so that the font's a little bit bigger and it's bold, and I center it and I put a box around it so that it's that's a parameter. That's where I type in something to limit the output of the data. So I'm going to take the filter off here. I'm going to put select all the dates again. But this year is going to be my filter. Okay. What we're going to do is go back to the query definition. Here's the command text that's giving me every single column from the account transactions table, and I'm going to add a where condition. So this is in SQL parlance, this is a filter. And where, and I'm going to tell it that I want the year of the transaction date column. I want it to look at the year of the transaction date column, and if I just type it in here, 2017, and I click OK, it reruns the query. It's grabbing all the current data from GP, and it gives me the 2017. I don't have it sorted, but I'll put it in order by date. And we're got a fair number of rows there. Okay, what's the good of this here? In my query, back in the connection properties, instead of an actual physical year, because that's what will come up every time I open up this file, I'm going to put a question mark. Now when I hit OK, Excel expects a value for that parameter which was indicated by the question mark. Now instead of typing 2017 here, I'm going to use get the value from a cell on the spreadsheet. I'll click there, and that's the parameter that I want, and then I'm going to say use this value for future refreshes, so I don't have to remember where it is. Excel will remember for me. Then I'm also going to say refresh automatically when the cell value changes. Okay, now I click OK. It's running the background query. Now what is being returned here is just the data from 2017. You'll notice that if I go to the bottom here, and it's 4445, this is not a filtered view. When we had all 22,000 transactions, and I chose the year 2017, well, it hid all the other rows, but the rows were still there. Now, this spreadsheet has just the data for 2017, and the resulting amount of data is quite a bit smaller. So when this sheet opens up, and there's one thing that I should do to make sure that it refreshes when it opens, I go back to my connections here, and there is a property on the first tab where refresh data when opening the file. I click that, and then I'll click OK. So now when I open the file, it will look at this parameter and filter out the data based on that year. So you can put in multiple conditions in the query for Excel by just adding on to the query statement. I've got where, and I can put and for a second parameter, and I can put, I don't know, I don't want to put journal number, journal entry, but I can say, since I see some journal entries there, I'll do that just for demonstration purposes. And journal entry, and this time I'll say between question mark and question mark, and click OK. It's expecting more parameters, so I'll put in 2577 for now, just for a value to use, and then it asks me for the next one, and I'll put 2580. Okay, it runs the query and selects the data. Now I not only have 2017 data, but I've only got journal entries from 2577 through 2580. That's all the data that has been retrieved from GP. I can put in here journal entry from, and I'll put 2577, and then I'll put 2 and 2580 right there, and I'll do my normal formatting, put the box around it, increase the size of the data, make them bold, make them centered, and I'll make sure that these labels are right aligned like that. Now these cells here are not paid attention to right away, but I can go back into my query, into the properties, go back to the definition, and there's a parameters tab down here at the bottom. So I've got 1, 2, 3 parameters. Now Excel doesn't let you name the parameters so that you can tell them apart. All it says is parameter 1, 2, and 3. If I click there, I see it's got the list. Now, you heard Shawn mention that he would like to see the tab list available as a dockable little dialog box. I would love if the parameters in a query could be named so I could tell them apart. All I have now is the location on the sheet. Okay, parameter 2, there's nothing there. So I'm going to get the value for this parameter from that cell. And then I'm going to get the parameter for this one from this cell. I'm not going to check these boxes to refresh automatically when the cell value changes, because it'll change, whenever I change any one of these three. If I have that box checked for all three, right now it's only the year. However, I can still use those. So, I don't know, do we have a 2590? I'll go to 2590. What this means is that I need to refresh the workbook. On the Data tab, there's a Refresh All. I click that, and it refreshes the data, and now you see the range of the journal entries goes to 2590. Okay, that is as far as I'm going to go with this. I wanted to make it about a half an hour. What we're going to, this is being recorded, so you can go over this process again, and also the template file. I will provide that as a download in the Green Bay library on gpug.com, and I will also change the query parameters, or the connection string in particular, because it says SQL Server and the server is my server. Well, you don't have that server. I can take out the user ID, leave the trusted connection in. I can take out the Microsoft Office and the workstation ID and leave the database, but I'll change this to be enter database here, and up here will be something like enter your server name here. All right. The other two parameters can stay the same, but then this will work just champion. I'll save it with those parameters. Then you go in, you change those, then you save your template as a name that you want to use. All right. Pam, anyone have any questions?
Not that I see, but I do have a comment.
Sure.
So being the database administrator at my office here and knowing people will try this on their live data, the one thing I would do with my template is where you have select star, I would have select top 1000 star for your template. Meaning it's only going to bring in the top 1000, so you don't accidentally try to pull in a million lines. You can remove that once you've figured out what columns you want in your SQL statement. So yeah, mine.
That's what she's talking about.
Template would be select top 1000 stars from whatever view you're looking at, and then you can remove that because you may or may not want more than the top 1000, but that will keep you from possibly slowing not only your Excel but the server or the SQL database.
Yes, and the DBA, the database administrator, will find you if will find you and visit just punishments on you if you take up too much of the server cycles. So that.
And this,
go ahead.
Once you figure out what the columns you want, and then how many there should be, or put your date parameters in there or whatever, you can remove that. I've accidentally forgotten to remove that, but you will want to remove it at some point.
Right. And this particular view, the account transactions, has a lot of columns too. We're out to column DQ, and most of these you're not going to need. A lot of them are blank. A lot of them have the same value in every single row, but it will help you. If you need the batch number, if you need the transaction source, you can retain that in your query. And of course, the columns can be formatted. This is not formatted as dollars. Whatever way you want. It's just Excel. It's just behind the scenes in getting the data from GP. That's where your connection to the SQL Server occurs. All right. So now I'm going.
I have a question.
And who is this?
This is Sethan Casper.
Hi, Sethan.
Hi. I have a question about your parameters. So you were saying that it just names them parameter 1, parameter 2, and so on. And the location, it would just say, like B1. Could you just name your cell, and then that way the location would give you a little bit more, of what it is?
Let's see. I'm going to name this. Go into the formulas and name manager and make a new one, and I'm going to call it, it's called transaction year. Somehow it figured out what it was. For the workbook, it refers to cell B1, and click OK. So now my name range is transaction year. And if I go into my parameter definitions and I change this to TRX_year, year. Different kind of value than what was provided. Okay.
Otherwise, could you try clicking on that cell again, and maybe it won't do B1 because you can hit that little arrow that's pointing up, and then it will select it.
Let's see. It's going to go with the absolute reference. That was a good question. I never thought of that, of using a named range for a particular cell to make this parameter list a little easier to deal with. As it is, you got to remember which one is which. You do have the cell address, and so those are visible. But thank you for that question. That was a heck of a good question. Sorry I couldn't give you a good answer right away. All right, I'm going to close this up, and we're going to turn things over to our co-chair, Pam Hall, and to John Kirsch, who is a faithful GPUG Green Bay supporter. Here's our two presenters. That picture of Pam is from Nashville in 2017, right, Pam?
That's right.
All right.
So I'm Pam Hall in Green Bay. I work at Terry Naturally Vitamins, Zero Pharma. I'm the IT manager here. I'm also very much into our database in SQL, so that's why I had to always add a little bit about SQL. And when Steve and I got together to talk about our next meeting, I was starting to talk about, well, you know, how we're managing things now in a virtual world. Many things changed for us here and probably you. I think it was the beginning of March, and we went from 3 remote workers, and they were not GP users, to between 50 and 55 remote workers that included most but not all of our 17 GP users, and that brought some challenges. And I was talking about, you know, what are you doing? How are you managing it at your company, and what's working and what's not? And so I got this idea that maybe this would be a good topic for our meeting. You know, there's frustrations on the user end, and there's frustrations on the IT end. And so what I did was kind of throw some ideas together, and I'm like, who can I ask for more expert advice on our options working remotely? And I reached out to John Kirsch. So thank you, John. He kind of came to my rescue. I've known him for quite a few years. He's presented at our meetings before and at Summit, and he was gracious enough to help me out here. This started as what we thought would be a short-term necessity, and now it's looking more long-term and possibly permanent. So along with the gut pain is, if you don't know our company, we're Terry Naturally Vitamins. One of our slogans is gut pain, and we have products for that. What I wanted to offer you is a little pain relief, and this will be available on our page. We have a terrynaturallyvitamins.com. This is a code especially for you viewers, and it'll be on there. You can log into the Terry Naturally Vitamins. Use this for any product on there. The promo code is Terry20. Terry Lemerand, I don't know if you're aware, he's the founder of our company. And it's good through the end of the year. Also, there's free shipping as well. So please feel free to take advantage of this. Maybe it's a pain relief I can give you a little bit besides what we're going to talk about today and what John's going to present. So talking about the pains, and please, if you have any of your own pains that you're having or your pain points in your virtual world right now, or it doesn't have to be virtual really, if you want to pop them in the comments, and then Steve will kind of shout them out possibly for us, because I don't see the comments right now. So, you know, what we're trying to ask is, what are your pain points living and working in a virtual world, and not just as a user or not just as an IT person. how have you had to adapt, or how have you adapted? What's working and what's not? The one thing that we found out is, trying to find out what the options are for our remote workers, and kind of some of it wasn't probably best practices because it was rushed at sometimes. I think we deployed about 50 to 55 people within a 5-day period. And what that included was they have a machine at work, and then we sent them home with we call them DR, disaster recovery machines, kind of a dummy terminal, if you will. It's not they would use that to remote desktop to their computer at the office. So it's kind of doubling up on the IT support of these machines, training users how to remote in, use a VPN, things like that. So, it's a big job, and our users were amazing at working with us. But now we want to make sure that we're using the best practices. We do have some users for GP that have laptops, and there isn't a machine for them to remote desktop or VPN to at the office, and they're connecting direct to GP through a VPN, and I'm sure John will tell you why never to do that. So the other thing is kind of what challenges in your pains, with the remote or VPN or internal. And I know some that we've experienced, and I know John had mentioned a few, is printing challenges. Our purchasing team is working at home. The printers are here. They're used to working off of hard copies. We've had some accounting people that we've had to send a printer home with them, or they have to come in and get paperwork. So those are all different challenges that we've had, along with GP crashing. That happens whether you work internal or out or external. Particularly when people are working from home, we've had a couple instances where batches were stuck for the fact that their connection wasn't consistent. That also includes performance issues. A lot of that's based on the VPN connections. At the initial deployment, we didn't have enough bandwidth. So there's different issues with the VPN connections. Excuse me. The other thing are workflows and approvals. That isn't something that we've experienced, but perhaps you have. And another one would be document scanning and storage. Doing that virtually is, I don't know how you do that, but maybe John has some ideas.
Yeah, and I can jump in. So hi, everybody. Hopefully everybody can hear me now.
Okay.
I don't have a camera available, so I'm going to stay in the background here. But yeah, the last couple I think I suggested to include on the list. I know, as I was as the kind of pandemic was starting up, we had a lot of questions around those couple of areas. Workflow approvals. A lot of times, if you're signing things in the office, passing the paperwork for invoices and kind of signing off on those, that was easy to do, right? Because maybe the person was right next to you or in the office next to you. But once everybody went virtual, how do you see that? So a document scanning solution, whether that if the volume is small enough to do that right in GP and be able to open those back up for review and approval, or if you needed to go to a larger solution, a kind of third-party add-on. There's a number of them out there that integrate with GP, but that was certainly kind of a question and ask that was going on. If we didn't need the document scanning part of it, but still needed to do the approvals just to make sure they were done, GP certainly has that built in to be able to do that via email or right in the program. So that was a pretty high request that I saw, at the beginning of the pandemic as everybody was kind of figuring out how to work from home.
Okay. So that was John Kirsch. Since you don't have a camera, I popped a picture up there of you, John, just to give everybody a little bit background. Probably most know you or know of you, but that just kind of gives you a little background of, 20 years of experience in Dynamics GP. Amazing. you've done a lot of presenting back, for us, like I said, and for the summits, and you're a very busy father of 5. And you're still on the board of the directors for the Golden House. And
Yeah.
I don't know how much coaching you're doing lately, but I'm sure you'll be back at it soon, hopefully.
Yes, yeah, definitely still keeping busy, just in a much different fashion right now. So, yeah, it's an interesting time.
So I'll turn it over to you, and maybe help with some of our, what the issues we're having and how can we best accommodate those and best practices.
Sure, and I see there's a couple of questions in there, so I mean I can kind of read through those quick here and see if they make sense to answer now. I see one in there. I think Shannon has a question around, sounds like a Wi-Fi signal in your house. I don't know that I'm an expert at that one, but I will say I've experienced similar. I guess ours was more kind of Wi-Fi bandwidth with 4 kids going to school and me working at home during part of this time. So with that, I actually I used Time Warner Spectrum as well. I actually just got a new modem back in April or May with the Wi-Fi on it, just because mine, while it was only 3 or so years old, technology changes really quick, and I just wanted to make sure I was on kind of the latest and greatest, and I do know I had improvement from that, both in terms of kind of coverage and speed. So I would definitely check with that.
I have a comment on that, John.
There's also. Oh, you do? Okay. Sorry, I didn't get that far down.
No, that's
Go ahead,
fine.
Steve.
I worked with a guy that his router, his wireless router, was in his basement, way off in a corner. But he worked in his office on the first floor, which was on the other side of the house, and there was a stone chimney in the way, and his reception in that first floor office was awful. So we wound up moving the router into the drop ceiling in the basement, closer to where his office was on the first floor, and kind of past where the chimney was. Then all of a sudden his signal improved. So the position of your router can be real important. Put it in a central location. Also, getting a new router, using the one that comes with the cable service is fine, but there are plenty of companies that sell wireless routers that you'll see them. They have multiple antennas, and they are more powerful at broadcasting through walls. And if you've got the two channels, the 2.4 gigahertz and the 5 point something, I forget what it is, those two different wireless channels, you can try those to see which one helps your reception.
All right, so hopefully there's a few ideas to try out. All right, next one was recommendations on how to connect, and seem to be having disconnect issues I see there. So, so Pam, I shared a couple of slides. Did you include those in the slide deck here, or I could share my screen?
I did. I've got them for you. So whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I think that question is, yeah, if you can go ahead and advance, because that question, I'll kind of talk about the different scenarios, at least how I categorize those, and I'll kind of laugh a little bit because, yes, Pam was talking about kind of connection 1, as I describe it, if you will. You can name them whatever you want, a workstation connection. And so maybe these will help kind of talk through. So in the scenario, a little bit of a diagram there that I threw together, but if we've got a remote worker, your laptop, whether or not it's a work laptop, basically any way to get connected back to your environment is fine in this scenario. But this scenario is really just showing that you have GP on a workstation and you have your server, your GP server in-house. So pretty traditional setup that most people have yet, and so we're really connecting back to our workstation. So I've got a couple of examples. There's a few different ways to make this happen, but one is if you're using a VPN in your remote desktop, just connect over to your workstation. So connect that VPN first, run the remote desktop, know your computer name, and then it's like you're using your desktop, but you're just connecting to it remotely. The same thing happens if you're using a remote connection application like LogMeIn, TeamViewer. Real VNC was more popular a while ago. There's probably 100 of them out there. So I definitely won't know all the names, but you can use that app without a VPN. You're essentially running a little client on your workstation, and that's always kind of connected to that service. And then when you hit the website and connect up, you're taking over control of your workstation as well. So that is that's still that client server. You're using your workstation remotely, basically. I will say, we're talking about VPN there and that first option, if you have GP installed on that remote worker side here in this diagram, I don't recommend doing that. I know it will work at times to connect, and you can get GP to log in. The reason it's really not in Microsoft's list of supported ways of using that, just because of the possible disconnects. So that goes to the question there. If we get disconnected in either one of the services that I'm talking about below there, your workstation is still connected to GP. So say you're posting a batch that takes 20 minutes to post. You lose that connection, your VPN drops, LogMeIn service turns off, whatever it might be. GP is still posting. It's happening in the office. You're not watching it. When you come back, it should be all posted and everybody's happy. If you are running GP actually on your workstation and using a VPN and then that drops, you've lost connection to the server. It's stopped posting. It's hung up. You've got to do a batch recovery. You're still logged into GP, it looks like, but you're really not. You get a bunch of errors on your screen. We all have probably seen what happens with that. So the reason, again, saying not supported or kind of that look around it is, even though we have really reliable internet and it probably does work a lot of the time, that especially at home where it's a little less consistent, if you get that drop in there, you can cause, small to, much bigger issues with that connection trying to run that over the internet.
John is being polite. I mean, he's being extremely polite. Pam, you can
Yes.
back me up on this. Do not run GP on your remote workstation with the VPN connection. Do not do it. You will be sorry if you do.
I talked about stuck batches. That's experience. We were under the gun, and it was with COVID and everything, people have to go home immediately at some point in time. And that's what we did, and I won't ever do it again. So we definitely have to have that GP workstation at work or another option. So that's kind of what, again, this conversation came about.
All right. So we'll leave that as option one. We can always come back to questions and stuff. If we'll move on to the next slide here, and I know my window at least has taken a second to update, but I can start to talk about it. There we go. Now I see it. The remote desktop server connection. So it's almost the same view as far as the connection for the large part. Again, we've got a laptop or a home computer or something that's acceptable for your policies to be able to connect back to your remote desktop server. So instead of having a workstation, we have a server that's running, and we have multiple connections usually to that RDS server. So, I might have 2 people, I might have 10 people connecting to that RDS server and running a different login and using GP on there. So you can do that in the office, and a lot of times for management purposes, just making it easier to not have to install GP, on a lot of different workstations. That might be a general practice that you use anyways. Well, the good thing about that is, again, with a VPN connection or even the published app that you can do right with Microsoft's RDS server, you can connect up to that RDS server, either run the app or run a full desktop, kind of like the workstation version of it, and we can use GP. Again, it's running in your environment. It's It's not really running any data over the internet other than a screen share. So it's very similar to the first one. It's just we're centralizing that onto a remote desktop server. I have a couple of other notes on the bottom. There's Citrix. There's some other kind of servers that work with that to be able to provide a remote desktop environment. So you might be using that or is available. I would say the newer versions of remote desktop from Microsoft with the published apps, they've kind of eliminated the need for a Citrix type add-on, and most just use Microsoft if you're in that type of Microsoft environment. So that's most common of what I've seen. And then I threw GP Web Client on there. It's not super popular, but it acts almost like a remote desktop server, except it's the web client version of GP. So if you have that set up in your environment, also just kind of another option, it's running, it's not a full remote desktop server, but it runs very similarly. So I kind of threw it into this category from my view, because either way I need a server set up to serve up GP. Again, the VPN and remote desktop can be an option here. So a couple of questions kind of popping up here. I see, do you know where we can find Microsoft recommendations? I would say these three, there's one more coming up here, would generally line up with Microsoft's recommendations, not in their wording. I don't know if there's a document. I mean, there's the system requirements documents that's out there from Microsoft, which kind of outlines what you need with it. I don't know that there's a document. Their white paper kind of touches on environments and stuff. If anybody else knows of a document, to speak up now or share it in the chat, you could do that. But I would say, these are really kind of the outline of the supported recommendations from Microsoft as well. Can you use VM GPRDS server? Sure, certainly. Virtual machines are kind of like a virtual workstation, so certainly can do that. It's kind of replacing some of the RDS. Even in the Azure environments now, they're going to virtual machines, so kind of a newer version of that. And then Steve, Microsoft recommends for Wi-Fi. Oh, just kind of answering that question before. Yeah, just I guess even Wi-Fi, when we talk about it, whether internet, remote connections, anything over a WAN, I guess wide area network you would hear, don't run GP over a WAN, so on your laptop and then connecting back to the office. Even Wi-Fi in the office, I guess kind of a pet peeve of mine, but we've really begun or have now rely on Wi-Fi. Microsoft still also lists Wi-Fi as not the supported way of connecting, just because, again, Wi-Fi is prone to some brief interruptions and can hang up the posting. So also would say don't use Wi-Fi in the office, use a wired connection.
I can say one thing about that too, John. If the Wi-Fi connection laptops in your office are, if the GP sessions are on the RDS server, that's a different story, because just as you said before, if your laptop goes wonky and has to reboot, your GP session is still running on the RDS server. So if you're posting, it's still posting. And then that's your, if you're using a wireless connection in your office, as long as you're logged in to GP on the RDS server, that's a better situation, certainly, than running GP on the local laptop connected via Wi-Fi to your SQL server.
Yep. So you could replace, another way to visually diagram that, you could replace internet with internal Wi-Fi, and both those are accepted if we connect back. We actually, in our office, don't have an RDS server, but we have a number of little surfaces or things like that where they'll remote, because we want to work in the conference room together, we'll remote over to the desktop that's wired and use it that way as well. So good point. Thanks, Steve. So hopefully that helps with the Wi-Fi. Pam, you had in there, can you use GP Web Client with GP Desktop? You can have a mix. So a user can use either one. You can only be logged in once, just like normal GP rules. But you could have both running, and yeah, certainly not a problem for kind of a mixed environment to do that.
But that's also on the the local internet, not over the VPN.
No, you can use the web clients over the internet even. So
Okay.
so it's kind of like a published app in that the web client is running that session. You could, in this diagram that we have up right now, you could replace GPRDS server with GP web client server. Because when that's set up and running, your GP session is actually running on that server. And even if you get disconnected, if you use the web client, get disconnected for any reason, you just shut off the browser or whatever it is. When you go log on that next time, it's going to tell you there's a session that we still see running. Do you want to connect to that, or are you looking to essentially start a new session, reset that? And so you can essentially rejoin just like the RDS desktop.
So you said there were some limitations on the web client. And if nobody else is interested in this and want to move on, just put a comment, move on, and I'll ask John separately because we don't have a GPRDS server and we don't use web client, and we need a solution. But he said there was limitations on that for the web client.
There's not functional limitations in terms of all the features are available in the web client. So you can do everything that you do right now. Where the couple of reasons where I've typically, just based on feedback and my own preference, gone with an RDS server versus the web client is that what functionally it's doing is essentially serving up GP on that web client server, just like your RDS server is running one for each person. It's essentially running GP in the background for everybody that's using a web client. And there's actually just a slight bit more overhead to run that web client. So when you're comparing servers that you need to set up, it's basically about the same amount of work and resources that you need to set up a remote desktop server as you do for a web client server. So they're pretty comparable. And then the other part of it that I look at it is that most people prefer the user experience of the full GP client. So having things like your shortcut keys that work and having macros that will run, there are things like that don't run in the web client that do run, and just kind of experience. If you've been using GP for a while, it's kind of like learning something new, which we all love to do, right? But yeah, it's a little different experience between the two. So some people might like the web client more. Most of the feedback I've had is because of those things, would prefer to have a remote desktop session and the full client available.
Yeah. The goal is to make the user feel like it's the same wherever they go. So I agree. Thank you.
All right. And then, so there's a question about, Mercy has there about, so remote desktop or remote desktop app, but are finding if we're using the app and VPNing in for file shares, gets a lot of disconnects and we cannot figure out why. So that could be a whole number of issues. Certainly bandwidth and internet connections come into play with VPN. That is really, it can be really difficult. If we're seeing it with all users, points to probably being a more centralized, in your office type thing. If it's a certain user, might have kind of unreliable, internet as far as just staying connected all the time, or Wi-Fi maybe, or something like that. So that's a starting point, trying to see if everybody's having it or if not. I will comment on the published app side of it. Well, it's really, really nice to be able to just launch GP on that published app, right? I have seen issues. It really, I haven't tried it with the very latest 2 releases quite as much, but I know up until 2018 versions in the RDS server, I think it's still like this. It does not like to rejoin the published apps very well. So if you get disconnected and you go to log into that published app again, it's usually going to essentially fire up a new GP instance for you, and then it's going to say you're already logged into GP. Do you want to kill that session? When really in the background it is running, it's just not rejoining that old session. So I've seen that with the remote app. If you use the RDS full desktop, I have not seen that issue, or it's much better at rejoining the session then and coming right back to where you left off. I wish I had an answer. I'm sure a lot of people did. I've seen several clients with that type of issue going on. And to be honest, they never completely resolved it. Sometimes we're able to update the RDS client versions on the workstation, like the version that's using it, using Windows updates or whatever method to get the latest RDS versions on there. But that is kind of one of those things. If you're seeing disconnects, the rejoining of published apps has not worked great, I will say.
Interesting point. I would ask Marcy about, with the file shares, if you turn off the VPN and if you have a remote app with, say, File Explorer, you can open up File Explorer as a remote app to your shared drives. That's a possibility.
Yeah, the more, as part of, again, even going to the web client discussion, the more that you do on that RDS server, the more it makes sense from my standpoint to open that up and get the full desktop served up so that you can work in, like that becomes your workstation essentially. So you can open up File Explorer, Word or Excel if you need to on there, and kind of anything else as far as getting the things in your network. I will mention one other thing on this point too with the RDS server, because I did suggest with the printing to put that on there. There's certainly the logistics, like if you have to print checks and you're working from home now, right? We need a printer that's next to you so you can change the stock. There's all of those things. Even if you have a smaller printer or something like that hooked up at home, the remote desktop can be tricky at times. I kind of had a little bit of experience with TS Print, which is a service that can be added on, and kind of helps with the remote desktop printing a little bit, helps control it, seems to have a lot less errors or things not printing out when you expect them to. So just TS Print, if you search for that on the internet, you should be able to find it right away, but it stands for Terminal Server Printing, but it's a kind of little add-on piece that I've used a little bit to help out.
Right.
All right. And then I had one other group here. We can maybe just advance, and I can talk about that. I don't know where we're at with time. If
Nope.
yes, Pam or Steve,
we're doing fine.
Okay. So the next one is almost identical to the last slide, but the difference is we're talking about a hosted connection here. So really, instead of on the right-hand side of the internet here, you'll see an RDS server and a SQL server. That would be somewhere else, right? Not in your environment. It would be hosted, again, Azure being Microsoft's choice there. I listed AWS, Google service would work as well, or any hosting provider. So we certainly know, there's the Nugevity, PowerGP, there are other hosting partners that are out there. You can use, a hosting partner that you might work with that, isn't one of the GP ones. Really, we just need to be able to host a SQL server, an RDS server, or virtual machines clients as well is an option. Even in Azure, those are, again, kind of just taking off within this year here. And so those are options here to essentially run that out in the cloud. So really, in the end, that remote worker, whether you're in the office or at home, it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, you're connecting to the internet back to your GP session to run it. So it's again the same as the last one, last slide here before, but we're just moving that out to the cloud somewhere. So that certainly is the most effort to do if you're not in that environment right now, because we've, either a lot of times it's a good time to do an upgrade, I'll mention too, but if you wanted to move to the cloud, you're essentially going to have to either set up new servers in Azure and subscribe to them, or pick a hosting provider and get GP moved up there. So it takes a little bit of time and effort and maybe cost to do that, but ultimately then, gets you that ultimate flexibility that you're set up and connecting to that and using it regardless of where you're at. So I guess I probably copied that slide, so you can maybe ignore a little bit of that on the under the internet section there. So you're probably not going to use a Citrix but certainly could be doing a published app. Sometimes you want a secure VPN connection to your Azure environment, so that's valid. Again, the web client is certainly an option there, and you can replace Azure with a hosting provider in any of those situations. So, so that's, I'll just kind of summarize in a nutshell, kind of option one, connect to your workstation for GP. Option two, connect to an RDS server in your environment and use GP. And then option three is a hosting profile setup. Essentially, you're connecting to wherever it is that it's hosted. So there's a lot of little nuances, as we just talked about, inside of each one of those. But if we're looking at how do we have an environment, have remote workers, and have enough bandwidth and everything else to make that work, the first option has probably the most individual management. If I have to have a client on every workstation, I have to kind of take care of every workstation. The latter two are much more long-term solutions that you're looking to set up because we've got a centrally managed environment to be able to use.
So I do have a question of like the RDS server, as far as how many user clients can you have on an RDS server? Is there a limitation? I'm sure you can build a bigger one, but what's kind of a rule of thumb or best practices on that?
Yeah, so scale up or scale out, I guess technology terminology is always a discussion with that. So Microsoft, again, does have their system requirements that they talk about it, but it's pretty vague in there. It just really depends on the number of users. There's a lot of variables. What you're all using in GP. If we're using just AR, AP, and financials, it's going to be a lot different than if we're doing heavy sales order processing transactions and if we're using field service and some of the other much more intensive pieces of GP. But, I typically had seen, you can definitely size a server to have 15 or more users on them. So, if I had an environment where there was 15 or less users, I typically didn't go to more than one RDS server unless we were worried about availability, just if one needed to be rebooted or something happened. I typically targeted one server. 15, you can go higher than that, but at some point then you start thinking, well, do I want two servers that are just, not quite as big resources-wise, or, just kind of split up the number of processors and memory and everything, or do I want to make one bigger server? I mean, when I've seen ones that have gotten up to 30, 40 users, 50 even, at that point, I would probably, if we only had one, I'd be looking at two, just for, again, kind of dividing that up a little bit. But, there's, it all depends on the number of processors and memory are the big two, right, to be able to split up and have enough. I see some questions in there. Just pausing to read those.
Yeah. I posted out there what other people, what challenges they're having as a user working from home. I'm IT and I don't work at home in GP, or if it is, it's after hours. But so I was just wondering what challenges they were experiencing working from home on a user level.
So Angie, I see the question there. So you're working from home 4 days, and one person is going in 1 day a week, 2 to 3 people in the office solo. So a big part of this, as I kind of ran through those 3 areas, though, what I would definitely consider is how long, do we expect this, right? That's probably a question everybody would love an answer for. But, if we think we're definitely going back into the office once this is done, and, we've been happy with GP running on our workstations and the server, and, I don't know, this is going to last another 2 months or it's going to last another 6 months, whatever you think that answer is. But, if we think it's a limited time, I tend to go through that first option there. Is using a client, getting it on the workstation, sign up for a service, and use that for a period of time. If we're looking at, kind of buying time, if you will. if we think you want to go to a more centralized, then I'd look at one of the latter two. So I'd kind of start at that point. If we're really on a limited basis, don't want to invest a lot into it right now. I don't know the prices on like a LogMeIn, but I think they're super cheap for a month. Maybe I'm going to guess like $5-10 a person on one of those services. Maybe I'm off if somebody wants to correct me, but I think you can sign up for that pretty easily. That the install is done in literally, a couple of minutes, and you can be up and running and using it. So I would start the discussion there. Is if you can use that, awesome. If it's going to be longer term, or you're ready to kind of maybe do a GP upgrade or something like that, well, then it might be a good time to look at one of those other two options. And again, maybe invest a little bit more, but you would be doing that anyways, and get it to, a more centralized setup then.
I was wondering, have people implemented more workflow in GP because of this? So instead of, taking it to your supervisor or head of accounting, using GP workflow?
Well, I can say that we implemented workflow for PO approvals, but we haven't added that since the epidemic struck. We've had that for a while, but there hasn't been any movement to get additional ones. I do want to put in a little bit of a plug, but also a caution. In our situation, I, for instance, working at home, and I have my own personal laptop here at home, and I'm dialed in to my work laptop at the office, which is closed, and it's off in a corner, and it's got stuff on top of it, so people don't use it. And I'm accessing that laptop, which then I use an RDS connection to GP from that laptop. So I'm remoted into my work laptop, and then I remote into the RDS server to run GP. I will say that I've used TeamViewer in the past for that type of situation, remoting into another workstation, and TeamViewer works champion. It's the best thing I've seen for doing remote access, remote control of another machine. However, it's a commercial product, and the licensing is like $50 to $70 a month per person. So you get the best product, but you are definitely paying for it.
And I know, like, we do TeamViewer for support on laptops externally, but we prefer VPN for security reasons at our company. So TeamViewer is a backup, but VPN is our primary connection to our through our firewalls and such.
Yeah, and I just so I popped open the LogMeIn because that's what I have the most experience with. It looks like access to 2 computers is $30 a month. So if you look at it that way and can split it up, or maybe you only can use that one person, but so somewhere between $15 to $30 a person per month. So there's a little bit of cost in that, obviously. I will say that the thing that I like about LogMeIn, and I'm not sure if TeamViewer does this or not, but so my workstation at work has 3 monitors on it, and so if I remote into that, it actually gives me, as soon as I connect, it gives me 3 different windows. So if I have 3 monitors at home as well, which I typically don't, but if I even have 2, like I do, then I can spread out at least 2 of those windows and essentially kind of simulate that, multiple monitor situation. And it actually like drags windows right across them. It works pretty cool. So I really like that feature for those that have multiple monitors with the LogMeIn piece as well.
I will say one thing about LogMeIn, because I tried that for a while too, a few years ago. And one thing that it offered that I thought was pretty darn cool was that you could have your desktop PC on your phone. And so you're running a Windows environment on your phone, and with a full touch interface and running your applications, it's just weird to deal with on that little tiny screen. And I'll say with Windows Remote Desktop, which is what I use to log into my laptop at work, all that's there is the laptop at work right now. It's not connected to any other monitor. However, I have 2 large monitors that I use here at home, and I can make a setting in the remote desktop application to spread my desktop over my 2 big monitors. And just like you just like you said, John, you can drag from one monitor to the other, and you have that very expansive workspace.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of setup. The good news is, if anybody's, we've been maybe in this situation for a while, but if you've been struggling to work from home, I mean, I think 3 different options between the 3 of us right now, of being able to set that up, and might be a little bit of a learning curve, but there's certainly options to be as close as possible, I'll say, as being in the office there.
That's pretty much all I have about the Got Pain. Just to remind everybody, if you have any more questions, please post them. Also, we'll be posting these slides up there, and the coupon as well. If you have any more questions for either John or Steve or myself, I think we have a few minutes still on our meeting. I thought the Excel was amazing, by the way. I love Excel, so I'm excited to see all those. Try them. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Marcy gave us a big thank you graphic thingy in the chat.
And those that are still here, we're looking at, the next meeting. We always start looking for the next meeting and different subjects and what do you want to learn about. I personally don't know how to do smart lists. Again, I'm not a GP user, but please, in the comments, just pop something in there. We'll take a look at it and see what we can do for the next meeting, or if you have something you'd like to present. This is my first time presenting virtually. Yeah, it's a little bit out of my comfort zone.
You did fine, Pam. You did fine.
Had a lot of coffee this morning, but please, anything. We love your ideas. Smart lists, yes. Ooh, so we just need to find an expert on smart lists. And then also, yeah, Marcia, I agree. It's nice, to kind of see what other companies are doing. I'm not a user, so, I'm interested from the IT level on what pain my users have. Believe it or not, IT wants to solve those problems. We don't want to make it worse. So I appreciate anything you put in there.
I've got a list of ideas on the Got Pain theme, Pam, rather than the remote access. I mean, everybody has frustrations with GP one way or another. One that I had, a major one, was that if you use workflows, I don't know how many do. We've got about 17 people online right now, but the workflow, you go to all that effort to set it up in GP because it's kind of finicky, and it seems like really primitive interface. But then you got it set and you got all the rules down, but there is nothing in GP that gives you a report showing all of the hierarchy for your workflow. How the workflow request flows down through the tree of variations that you got. There's no printed report. So I went through the hassle of figuring out where the data is stored, how it's related to each other, and I found, that's why they can't do it in a standard report, because there are so many different options. So anybody that does it will have more or less a customized version based on their own rules, what options they're using in developing the workflow. But I can show what I did to come up with an Excel pivot table that displays all of the workflow options. Tables and fields, just getting familiar with the tables in GP and the field names in GP. There's a couple very good resources online for that. GP Power Tools. Everybody should have GP Power Tools. And one in particular, one thing that it does well is if somebody is unable to use a feature that appears in their menus, GP Power Tools will bring a message up on screen, and it's not going to be one of those generic, hard to interpret standard GP messages. GP Power Tools actually gives you information, which window you were trying to open, and what the name of it is. Then you can go into GP Power Tools and look at the security log and find the place where you were denied access to a particular window. You can change the security on the fly and add that particular window to one of the GP tasks. And then the user just has to log out and log back in. Boom, they got access. Because finding a resource in GP is, oh my God, how many are there? I mean, John, you may know off the top of your head how many individual resources there are, windows and reports and blah, da, 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 da. But there's like thousands. So finding the one is a chore.
I was going to say, there's nobody that knows that answer.
Oh, that's an interesting point, because when you add on something for GP, well, there you got all additional resources, depending on what modules you have installed. But it's a huge number, and finding one of them with just GP itself is a puzzler.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, Angie has some non-IT questions that maybe some of the other users here could help her with as far as best practices. So, Angie, are you a GPUG member?
Yeah.
Okay. So have you gone to, because on the GPUG site, and it takes a little bit of searching, but they have some really awesome webinars that are recorded and some PowerPoints and documents and things like that might help you out. I don't know if Steve and John or other users can help you.
I can give you a resource there, Angie. The recorded webinars, there are hundreds of them. So I went through all of them, all 700 or 800, whatever, and I put them into an Excel workbook. And the links in the Excel workbook go right to the recorded webinar. So as long as you're logged into gpug.com, you click on the link, boom, the webinar comes up. And it's a little easier to search because it's in a spreadsheet and it's got the full title for what it is, and it's organized by type of function.
Just so you know, while you're looking for that, one of IT struggles is people working at home trying to communicate with each other. We send cameras home and webcams, and getting to meetings and sharing screens. Everybody's had that struggle, at least on our side.
Yeah.
So,
and pasting in the link to the webinar Excel workbook, which is current as of June 10th. I haven't updated it since then. It is not a refreshable. Let me tell you that. It is not a refreshable workbook. Okay.
So I'll add to Angie, to your question though too. I mean, not particular to GP, like any ERP system, I think, they give you multiple ways to do something, right? So a lot of these webinars are going to say, well, to write off a balance, for example, we can go in and manually do that. We can do a credit memo to do that. We can actually use the write-off kind of wizard or feature to be able to go through and do that too. So there are a few ways. Some of those things usually kind of get handed down person to person a lot of times. A lot of times don't get documented, but certainly the bigger processes to put together little kind of cheat sheets or documented steps to do things are a lot of times really good best practices to have. because there are 2 or 3 ways. Not that they don't all get to the same result potentially, but that one, for example, you probably have at least 3 or more ways to accomplish that, and it's just figuring out which way you're going to use as your standard process.
Yeah, currently we're doing if they overpaid, we're creating an invoice and applying it against that, which seems like a lot of steps. For any example that I've had in the past, I haven't had this many steps. So I feel like we're just not doing it the most efficient way.
Sure. And yeah, there's routines. I will say a lot of times I haven't seen the routines used too much to like write off documents, but certainly can do that if there's a whole bunch of them. So yeah, it's always good to know all of your options and then come to one that makes the most sense for you.
Definitely.
Good question from Christy. Are the webinars only available to paid GPUG members? Some of them are available to anyone. I can't tell you which ones are, however. You just have to click on them and see if they turn up. But that, good question.
So what I've read too, and I've got to see some of, so if you attended Summit or not, I know that was an earlier question, but there were a number of the recordings that were available, I think only if you attended seminar or paid for that option to be able to view those webinars then. I don't know if there's still a chance to go back and do that, but certainly content around that. But I know in the most recent post too, as they're redoing essentially the whole GPUG website, is that the latest I read was that 70% of the content or something like that, 60 or 70% was going to be available to everybody. And I think 30% was, so I think it was 60, 30, and 10. So 60% was just publicly viewable, 30% was paid GPUG members, and then the last 10% is some sort of paid additional amount, like an academy or maybe the summit or something like that. So I don't know. I don't think that launches until the beginning of next year. So I think we're still kind of staying in our same format for right now, at least. But I know there's a target to make a bunch of it available if you're not a paid member to be able to see some of that as well. So if anybody did attend Summit, I think you got the link and got kind of the preview to what the new site is going to be and some of the content and everything of how they're releasing those recorded sessions. All right. I see Steve walked away. Anybody else have anything? Otherwise, everybody can have 15 minutes early to lunch or...
Thank you. Yeah. Unless anybody else has any questions, take the 15 minutes, grab your lunch, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for attending. Check out the notes for the spreadsheets, the coupons, PowerPoints from today, all that. Please check back and we'll have them up there. I'm not sure how quick we get those all up there, but we'll get them as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, everybody. We'll have
Have a good day.
We'll have the recording posted very, very soon.
All right. Thanks, everyone. See you later. Hopefully in person soon.
Someday.